everybody. Tuesday night, so it's a night we have a chance to talk about the Dhamma. I think there's a few questions have come in, so we'll do our best to give you some answers. So.
Dear Ajahn, during these times there is so much Dhamma and online talks, etc., and hearing people ask questions which are very technical, and also people advising me to read or listen to talks on the Nikayas, the Abhidhamma, and advising me to read and on the suttas, etc., etc. It feels like I need to get a PhD in Buddhism. I keep the 5 precepts. I keep 8 precepts once a month. I meditate. I offer dana. And generally, I think I'm an okay person. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are these enough to help me get to be a stream enterer, or do I need more advanced practice? And if yes, what should I concentrate or practice on? I do understand the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path and so on. I do have an understanding of the basic practice. So I hope maybe you can talk a bit about this. I hope I don't come across as being a lazy practitioner, but the more I listen, the more I feel like it's overwhelming.
Quite a long question. We haven't had a Q&A session for a few weeks, so I guess the questions get longer while you're waiting. But a good question. And one thing about the growth in technology, it's a double-edged sword in a way. We have this amazing opportunity to hear the Dhamma and study the Dhamma from the web in different media, which is a good thing. But then we also have the problem with choice and the proliferation of choice. Where do I go? What do I listen to? In the old days, say when I was a young monk, it was which book should I read? Now it's which YouTube channel should I watch? So the problem is much the same. In the time of the Buddha, it was the same. There was no technology then, but people would wander around looking for their teacher, spend a lot more time wandering here and there. And Ajahn used to talk about monks who would spend all their time wandering, going from this teacher to that teacher, never quite satisfied, always comparing what each teacher said and then getting more confused. The more they listened, the more they compared. So it is one aspect or one danger in the practice is just the overwhelming amount of information we can be guided to, told about, come across. The Eightfold Path, you say you have an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. Well, that is the heart of the Buddha's teachings and the practice he encouraged us to develop, so that's a good starting point. The Eightfold Path has its 8 factors, reduced down to Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Or sometimes Ajahn used to say it just reduces down to the one thing, this mind, knowing this mind in the present moment. Because one of the things we have to do in the practice is learn how to learn from our experience. And we begin by hearing the Dhamma, reading the Dhamma, but then we have to bring that into our heart and observe and get to know the Dhamma through our own experience. And even if you have studied a lot, maybe like you say, you've studied all the way to PhD in Buddhism, that may be a good thing, but it's still knowledge based on memory. It's not yet knowledge of the heart. And this is why the development of mindfulness and discernment particularly through meditation, but also just in general daily life, is so vital to the practice, because we have to learn through experience and bring what we've heard into our experience and observe ourselves and observe what is going on in this mind. So the Four Noble Truths and the teachings we've heard, they give us a framework for reminding us what we have to do, and then giving us pointers or clues where to look, what to do. But we then have to develop mindfulness every day. And so a regular meditation practice is essential for progress in the path. And it sounds like you've already understood that to one level, but there's always more we can do, isn't it? The true disciple of the Buddha is never complacent. The Buddha himself said he himself could never be complacent with the knowledge and the level of happiness and wisdom and good qualities he developed, because there was always an awareness that there's still more to do. The causes of suffering hadn't been completely removed from his experience. So he was aware of that, he could see that, sense that. So he was never negligent of the practice, never complacent. He was always looking to deepen his understanding of the human mind. So perhaps that's one quality that we have to keep in the forefront of our practice, whether we're in the monastery or lay people, developing effort and energy, putting that into the practice. Because we can easily get lazy. I mean, on a daily basis we'll have our lazy moments, or in a more long term, you could say we get lazy. Sometimes we have the view, I've done enough for this life. This practice is so difficult, training my mind is so difficult, I'll leave it for some future life. And so you hear people say, I'm going to wait until Maitreya Buddha, the next Buddha, and get enlightened with Maitreya Buddha. But we really don't know when the Maitreya Buddha will come, how far, how quickly or how slowly that's going to happen, and where we'll be at that time, who knows. And if you haven't developed the qualities and the effort in your practice this life, well, that's still waiting for you for your future life. It's not like you meet the Maitreya Buddha and it's kind of, you get some free ticket to Nibbana and it becomes easy when you're with the Maitreya Buddha. The same obstacles you're facing now will come up then as they are now. You don't get away from them. Which, when you reflect on it, it's one reason why we should put all our effort into the practice now, in this life. It's because it doesn't get any easier, and the problems we face won't go away. They're still going to be there tomorrow, the next day, unless we face up to the challenges of the practice and put effort into the practice. Ajahn Chah and many of the forest teachers, they have this great sense of timelessness about them in their teachings and in their presence. When you practice with good teachers, good practitioners, there's this sense of we're on the path and we're doing the practice, however long it takes. That doesn't matter as long as we're practicing and putting our effort into practicing correctly. It may take one lifetime or it may take 100 lifetimes, we don't know, because everyone's at a different place. They have a different karmic experience, different karmic accumulations, good and bad. People have developed their barami, or what we call vasana, to a different level. So you can't always just compare with others, the others around you. The important thing is to be on the path. And if you stay on the path, well, sooner or later you'll get to your destination. Quickly or slowly, well, there'll be a number of different factors that affect that. Probably the most important thing is to develop samma ditthi, right view, and maintain that and keep deepening that, which is why we keep coming back to the Dhamma. And it is useful to read suttas, listen to the Dhamma, but then we have to reflect on it and compare our own living experience with what we've heard. And keep developing, insight into the Four Noble Truths, developing insight and right effort from that. So the effort to abandon unwholesome dhammas, cultivate wholesome dhammas. That's the daily work of the student of the Buddha. And you're never wrong when you're doing that. As long as you're practicing cultivating the wholesome, abandoning the unwholesome, you're on the path. So Ajahn Chah used to say quite often he used to say, I'm teaching you right view, I'm encouraging you to develop right view. Because with right view, then out of that comes right thought, right action, right speech, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. All the other factors of the path will flow out of that. And they compare right view to like the lantern that shows you the way as you walk along the dark forest path at night. Without right view, then it's like having no lantern or no torch. You start tripping over and bumping into things and life gets difficult. So you have to keep coming back to the developing right view, whether you're in a monastery, on a retreat, or in the lay life, at work, whatever. Right view is your refuge, your foundation for the practice. And if you keep doing that, what you find, I think I found and many others find, is that you become much more aware of what is skillful, wholesome Dhamma and what is unskillful. And how do you become aware of that? Well, unskillful Dhammas, unwholesome Dhammas have their consequences. They bring us more suffering. So the more we fall into and hold on to thoughts rooted in greed, anger, delusion, and all the other kind of mental defilements, the more we suffer. The more we recognize unwholesome dhammas as the cause of suffering, we develop awareness and wisdom and clear comprehension, the more we will abandon them, give them up from our mental experience, and the more peace, happiness we'll experience for that. And that's a good way to look at your practice, year on year, year in, year out. We just had another Vasa finish. Every year there's a 3-month Vasa. And you can use that as a reflection. This year, am I suffering more than last? And I don't just mean physical suffering, because as we get older, maybe that will increase. It's the nature of the body to get more painful, more diseased, gets worse as you get older. But I'm talking more about mental suffering. Are you suffering more this year than last year? Do you get more angry this year than last year? Do you lose your temper more easily, more quickly this year compared with last year? Do you have more doubts this year compared with last year? Do you have more worries, anxiety and stress this year compared with last year? Do you have more selfishness, more greed this year compared with last year? Are desires overwhelming you more this year compared with last year? Or are you finding you're more content this year? You're more patient, more tolerant. You find it easier to maintain kindness and compassion. When you meditate, do you find your mind settles down more easily, more often this year compared with last year? These general reflections you can make, and they're going to give you an idea of whether you're still on the path and going in the right direction. You don't necessarily need to go and have an interview with a teacher every day. Today I'm angry, today I'm worried, today I feel really peaceful. Sometimes we do that. We discuss our practice with Kalyana Mitta, and that can be useful. But really you need to do this for yourself. Every day observe your mind and your state of mind. And that's why we do practice meditation, practice chanting, and practice mindfulness in daily life. Because mindfulness will alert you to if things are going wrong. If you are finding you're creating more suffering for yourself, for others, well, that's an alarm that you have to address and not just carry on sort of with a vague hope that things will improve. You have to start looking, what's going wrong? Where am I attaching too much to greed, anger and delusion? Where do I need to abandon? What do I need to abandon? Where do I need to put more effort into my practice? As a layperson, you ground your practice in the 5 precepts. So that's a reflection every day. Am I upholding the precepts? And if you're keeping the precepts with right view, then you're using the precepts as a way to train your mind to abandon, say, greed, anger, and delusion. You're not just keeping the precepts by clinging to them, or blindly holding on to them, assuming that they'll improve your practice. I mean, they will, but you also have to practice with discernment, with right view, and you're training in the precepts to abandon those unwholesome, unskillful intentions. And if you practice every day with the precepts, well, it does get easier, and you become much more aware of your intentions, what's motivating you from moment to moment through your day. And as you become more skilled with the precepts, well, you'll become more relaxed, more happy within yourself. Your mind is less agitated, less anxiety and concern about things you've said and done, because you haven't said or done anything that hurts other people, hurts yourself. So if you ground yourself in the 5 precepts and then try and develop a meditation practice on a daily basis, then you have every opportunity for your mindfulness to deepen, and from that wisdom will deepen. You understand these truths that we talk about and chant, like the impermanent nature of body and mind, the selfless nature of body and mind becomes more apparent the more you reflect on it. And the precepts keep your mind stable. You just reflect on your life. If you're not keeping the 5 precepts, then you tend to start having trouble with other people and within yourself. Why did the Buddha have us keep the precepts? It's to encourage us to develop more a refined awareness, and to develop these skillful states of mind, which are the forerunner of the development of samadhi and insight. And so if you're losing that, you're not following the precepts as guidelines, you'll tend to find you're much more agitated. You have more arguments, you have more aversion coming out in your behavior and your speech, your actions, maybe falling into greed and so on. And the practice just gets harder and your state of mind will degenerate. So the 5 precepts are an essential part of the practice that helps us to observe our behavior on a daily basis. Right view, the 5 precepts, and then putting effort into developing mindfulness. It is challenging in the lay life, but we have to rise to that challenge based on our faith and also our understanding that there really isn't anything more valuable to us than the practice of the Dhamma, and there's nothing more desirable than a peaceful mind. It's more valuable to us than all the wealth we can find in the world, the fame, the fortune, the good things that the world has to offer can't match the mind that is peaceful, clear, understanding the Dhamma. So, it's natural to have doubts as we practice, but channel them back into putting more effort into your practice, developing more mindfulness, more wisdom, and just keep going basically. One who keeps going, doesn't give up, will definitely get some benefit from their practice.
Dear Luang Por, how does a lay follower practice sense restraint, since contact is the nutriment for feeling?
Well, you said it. Sense contact is the nutriment for feeling. And sense contact is taking place all the time, every moment of every day, in one form or another. We have 6 sense doorways: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. And so we develop particularly mindfulness. The heart of sense restraint is the development of mindfulness, clear comprehension as much as we can, to guard over the mind, to be alert, to pay attention to sense contact that is taking place, but also to allow wisdom to function. As part of the practice of sense restraint is to, limit, make wise choices in our life, sometimes to limit the kind of sense contact we have. The technical term for this is indriya samvara, and this is considered a form of sila, a form of basic morality, even though it's not exactly the same as the 5 precepts, but it's a function of sila in the sense we have to make wise choices in our life, how we interact with the world, and sense restraint is that's something we have to practice on a daily basis, because this world, particularly nowadays, it's the amount of technology, products, experiences that human beings can have through their senses is proliferating all the time. It's getting more and more. Because human beings are creative, skilled, they're intelligent, and because our cultural values now are that we tend to be very materialistic, consumer-orientated, we're constantly trying to give people and sell to people the new, the latest experience, the latest product. Everything is packaged in that way in our culture, in our society. So our senses are being bombarded more and more. So just to live on a relative level of peace in the world, we need sense restraint. We need to make wise choices. We need to practice discernment in how we interact with our senses, with the world. We can't just follow feeling all the time, in the sense we can't always just seek out pleasant feeling. We have that desire for pleasure arise, but a wise person doesn't just follow it every time it arises in the mind. We develop mindfulness, restraint, discernment, because otherwise we just become addicted to whatever it is that brings us pleasure in the world. We tend to notice the more extreme addictions to pleasure, like drink or drugs or sexual activity or things like that. But the desire for the pleasure of the senses is there all the time. Just sitting now at this moment, after a while you might get a pain in your leg and you want to move, seek a more pleasant posture. We are constantly reacting with desire for sense pleasure all the time. But we have to learn how to have enough mindfulness sometimes to say no, I don't need that pleasure, or at least to consider, do I need this or not? So like earlier this evening we chanted the reflection on the use of the 4 requisites, which sometimes people think is just a chant, a reflection for monastics, but really it's something you can bring up in the lay life as well. We use food. For a monk it's called bindabata, but everybody eats food, everybody needs clothing, everybody needs accommodation, and everyone uses medicines for sickness. These are what the Buddha pointed out are the most basic necessities for living in the world. We need to practice mindfulness and use wise attention as we use the 4 requisites. That's giving you a good reflection how to practice sense restraint and restraint in the use of material things in the world, because it's a basis for attachment. If we're not restrained, we're not mindful, we get caught into constantly seeking out sense pleasures, saying yes to everything, wanting more, and there's no end to that. There's no limit to it. But just saying no and running away from everything or pushing everything away won't work either, because we still need to live in the world and our senses are still active. We don't like pain, and some of our sense experience is painful. So we try and practice mindfulness. Sense restraint comes with the practice of mindfulness, and we limit. Sometimes, we limit the painful experiences we're exposed to. So when you do have pain in your legs, well, you maybe change posture. When you're hungry, you can eat. It's not wrong to do things that are pleasurable if one is doing with wise reflection, with mindfulness, within the limits of sila, samadhi, and panya. We still do have sense pleasure, and we still can limit the painful feelings we have to whatever level we can. But we have to have that mindfulness and restraint and make wise choices as we're living in the world. And you'll see the practice of meditation really helps there. If you practice meditation regularly, you get a strength of mind that comes through the practice both of mindfulness, with development of wisdom, patience, development of the contentment of the mind that is peaceful on the inside. This helps also to develop a much more refined level of sense restraint. So when you practice mindfulness of the breathing, say you're giving up this habitual seeking pleasure with the senses or running away from pain, attraction and aversion, those normal experiences of the mind, you're abandoning them as you put attention on one object, say the breath. And that's why you get much more refined states of happiness and calm when you abandon the normal concern with the senses. You give up pleasure and pain, you develop mindfulness, you develop equanimity and detachment from that. And it opens the mind up to much deeper realms of peace, and from that deeper realms of understanding. So it is an important or an essential part of training the mind, learning to develop mindfulness and wisdom around sense contact, and particularly aiming to abandon craving and attachment that forms from the pleasure or the pain we experience. And when we do this successfully, then we experience much deeper states of samadhi, and from that our wisdom can really see the impermanent nature of the world, the lack of self in the world. When we're not mindful, we're not wise, we tend to attach to everything as self. So we run after our pleasures, we hate pain and get upset by it and run away from it. And much of our day is spent in one way or another doing that, moving towards pleasure, moving away from pain, unless we start developing some mindfulness and keeping the mind in the middle. When you're mindful, you might still experience pleasure or pain, but you don't let the mind go into craving as it does that. So Ajahn Chah was very good at getting monks to contemplate this. If we just follow our desires all day, often we don't contemplate that much because we're just following desires, and we can do that. But in a monastery, it's a very good place to learn how to be mindful of sense contact, be mindful of pleasure and pain, and how to deal with that with mindfulness and wisdom so that craving doesn't arise. So, Ajahn Chah would do it with things like, the famous one is the cup of coffee. When you're living in a Thai jungle with very minimal support in very simple environment, something like coffee. When I first became a monk, you certainly didn't have coffee every day. It would be a treat. Once in a while, coffee was offered, and very quickly it would run out because there'd be quite a few monks living together, so it wouldn't last very long if a jar of coffee was offered, say. So Ajahn Chah and other teachers would use these simple little pleasures that every monk still has attachment to one thing or another, but he'd use simple situations to help expose that desire for sense contact and the pleasure of sense contact, or to toughen up the monks a bit to deal with pain as well. So like you might sit for many hours listening to talks, chanting, without being able to go back to your hut in the forest and do what you want. You have to do what the routine and the requirement of the monastic training is. You have to follow that. So you might have to sit longer than you would normally sit on the ground, and you might have some pain that you learn to be patient with and be mindful of and let go of the negativity. Or when the coffee was brought out, the way it was brought out in those days was not, you're given a cup teaspoon, sugar, cream or whatever ingredients were available were all put into one big kettle, either by the nuns or the novice monks. And that kettle of coffee, once in a while it did happen, coffee came along, would be offered to the senior monk, Ajahn, or whoever the senior monk was. And sometimes it was quickly passed down the line. Everyone maybe got a cup of coffee, or sometimes only half a cup. But sometimes the kettles were placed down and just placed down in front of Ajahn or whoever the teacher was, and they weren't immediately distributed. Why? Well, there may be different factors here, different reasons. Perhaps it wasn't the right time, but perhaps it was just as a way of seeing how desire forms partly over expectation, isn't it? Sense contact is affecting not only Vedana but also Sanya, memory. So you've had past sense contact, so you had sweet coffee last week and you enjoyed it, so then you're quite anticipating this week's cup of sweet coffee, especially if you're going to meditate late in the evening. So there's a lot of anticipation there based on anticipated sense contact. But then if Ajahn Chah doesn't pass the kettle of coffee down the line of however many monks, you're just sitting there meditating, waiting, and it's not coming, well, you have a good opportunity to contemplate the sense contact of not getting what you want, or the feeling of pain as you're sitting, waiting. This is a very simple situation, but a great opportunity to watch the mind, how it's pulled around by desire, wanting something you haven't got, or trying to get away from something you're with that you don't like. And this often boils down to simply sense contact. Liking, pleasant, unpleasant, liking, disliking, and developing more mindfulness, more patience, more understanding at that point, you can burn off a lot of craving and attachment. And living in a Sangha, it helps, because when you have other practitioners who've learned how to do that, you get a very good example. So if you're at the end of the line, how it would be was at the end of the line where your mindfulness and wisdom is not yet so good, if there's a kettle of coffee, sweet coffee at the top of the line, then you give in to that desire and you look. Maybe that kettle of coffee is 10 or 15 meters away, and you look, when's it coming? And that look, all the senior monks who have already learned how to let go of this desire will see that look in the junior monk, and they won't say anything, but they'll know, he's still got desire for coffee. That's what it's like. Practice. This is, satipatthana in daily life in a monastery. When's the coffee coming? Agitation coming out in physical form, moving around, shuffling around, looking. If it gets really bad, maybe the monk actually says something, complains, why isn't the coffee being sent? Or maybe something, a touch, the coffee's still not coming, we've been waiting half an hour. That's what it does to you, doesn't it? Desire does that to you based on contact, past sense contact or future sense contact. It does that to you. It proliferates the mind with craving. So you're learning how to let go, and the quicker you learn, the more peaceful you become. So the monks who have practiced longer maybe have learned that. If I don't get my coffee, I won't die. It's not the end of the world. It'd be nice to have it, but if I don't get it, never mind. You keep your mind in the middle. You get what you want, you don't get what you want. You keep mindfulness, keep your mind in the middle, and you don't suffer there. Ajahn Chah was always saying the place in the middle is where the place of no suffering. Because you're not clinging, you're not for, you're not against, you're accepting conditions as they are. Especially if it's something you can't control, then you just have to accept it peacefully. When you can do that, your mind goes to a much deeper level. Meditation goes deeper, because you can shed or let go of things very easily. So these are the kind of practices in daily life, just being patient with difficult situations, difficult people, accepting you don't always get what you want, and the same when you do get what you want, not getting too excited or carried away by it, by that kind of sense contact. So I still remember the first time I was at Ajahn Chah's monastery at Wat Pah Pong. there was a bell rang for a drink. It wasn't coffee, there wasn't any coffee, but it was a sweet drink. And I looked up, I said, that's the bell for the drink. And I said to another monk, a Thai monk, I said, oh, are we going to get a drink now? And he said, yeah, we're going to get a drink, but don't look so happy. The more you attach to that happiness, the more you'll suffer later when you're not getting a drink. I thought, oh, that sounds a bit grim, but actually it was a very good lesson in how to develop mindfulness and sense restraint in that situation. So you learn over time. If you get it, you don't, it's all good. You keep your mind in the middle, and on you go. And Ajahn Chah is famous for using those simple situations to help people understand this point and giving them a much deeper freedom based on sense restraint, mindfulness, wisdom, insight into impermanence. You're freeing your mind. It might sound difficult, and it is a difficult practice, but you're freeing your mind from attachment to the senses, to the pleasures, the pains of life. That's where real freedom lies.
Dear Ajahn, in the last few weeks in my meditation, my mind goes into a contemplative mode where I am able to visualize a person's outer skin and muscles melted away, leaving only the skeleton and the body parts. I tested myself by recalling beautiful girls, people that I used to not like, family members and friends, and myself. The same effect occurs to all. Interestingly, this experience makes my mind peaceful. Now I am able to see people in my mind just as skeletons and body parts, regardless of male or female. I felt it has reduced the greed, hatred, and delusion within me. May I ask if this approach is a right practice, or do I need to correct my practice?
It sounds like correct practice, particularly mindfulness grounded in the body. There's many aspects to mindfulness of the body, contemplating, following the breath, recollecting the 32 parts of the body, the 4 elements, or the super meditations. And it sounds like you might have a natural aptitude for that. Some people have to really develop that practice a long time before it starts to bear fruit. Others quicker. Partly it's a character thing. But if you find it makes you peaceful contemplating in this way, then I would carry on and doing it regularly. One thing to be aware of is that we can, again, like I was saying earlier, we can get complacent. So, maybe you're going through a good period in your practice where you can visualize people you know, ones you like, ones you don't like, as skeletons, pull their bodies apart as a visual exercise and develop a great sense of peace, detachment, equanimity as you do that. But it's not sure. Ajahn Chah used to say, the meditator always remembers it's not sure, nothing is certain, because maybe there'll be some person or situation that arises that blocks you, that you can't do it anymore. So particularly you have to be a bit careful when you do this with people who you find attractive. So if you're a guy, maybe it'll be other, reflecting on women. If you're you're very mindful and you're careful, you can do this, but you also have to be aware that there may be some people you find it very difficult to do this. As soon as you think of them, visualize them in your mind, you see them as a skeleton for 1 minute, and then the mind goes into a fantasy or proliferation, sexual proliferation perhaps. Much more after that 1 minute is up, then it goes on to something else. So you have to be a little bit circumspect, cautious in your approach. But when it's working, then it definitely is the right way to go. Generally, we encourage to practice with ourselves first and become very familiar with visualizing the different parts of the body, contemplating them, holding attention on them. And it can go in a number of ways. We can contemplate anicca, so how these body parts change with time, with aging, with death. One can analyze them into the four elements, and maybe one particular element. So say if you contemplate the bones, maybe contemplate how the bones, the hardness of the bones, the solidity of the bones is coming from the earth element. And contemplate how, this human body is made up of the four elements, maybe just focusing on one element, the impersonal nature of elements. Earth is just earth. When you're contemplating the earth element, the sense of self, ego, the conceit of I tends to disappear. So you have to experiment with this, keep going. But it's not only is it an antidote to lust, but it's also, can give you an insight into not self. So I would encourage you to keep practicing in this way. One recommendation from Ajahn Mahabua was that if you think your practice of body contemplation is getting very good, and you're quite fluent in doing as you just described, seeing people as flesh, bones, seeing the body parts, maybe some people see others as corpses, then pick the person that you find most attractive in the world, in your life, whether it's somebody from the past or someone currently in your life, and visualize them coming to you. Coming to you, taking their clothes off and wrapping themselves around you. What does that do to you? Can you still see them as a skeleton? It's a real test of where your mindfulness is, the level of your samadhi, the level of your insight. As I said, proceed with caution, because often it doesn't work. And you have to gently keep doing this practice, developing the insight, developing the supasanya. But keep going, keep doing it as in whatever way you can that you find successful. If you're feeling peaceful, that's a good sign.
The last question this evening. How do the Buddha's teachings help us to resolve conflicts in the world?
Well, they have great potential for conflict solving. Imagine if everybody in the world kept the 5 precepts. Most conflicts would be gone. There may be still subtle rivalries and competition, but the 5 precepts would sort out most problems, I think. Maybe you might say the Buddhist perspective on conflict resolution tends to, you work from yourself outwards. The more we can resolve our own internal conflicts that are promoted by greed, anger, delusion, wrong views, attachment to wrong views, attachment to the sense of self, the more we can see through that and let go, then the more we have to offer the world in the way we interact with other people, and the more you found a way to be at peace with yourself, then the more you can maybe encourage that in others by example and in the way you interact. Probably with conflict resolution, one of the most important factors is practicing right speech and skillful speech, skillful communication, which is part of the Eightfold Path. And we all need to learn how to speak more mindfully, speaking at the right time, the right words, those words that are useful in the right way, in the right place. But we also need to learn how to listen. A lot of conflict comes through people not listening to each other, either individuals in relationships or in the workplace or in a monastery, or groups of people or whole countries. Conflict happens when they stop listening to each other. It's not working. Talk over each other, put each other down, no respect, not listening. So developing both communication skills, the ability to speak skillfully, listen skillfully, but other attitudes as well are developing mindfulness, developing compassion, kindness, compassion, understanding. The more we understand about our own suffering and how to address it and reduce it, the more we can pass that on to others in the way we relate to them. But we also need to practice equanimity, upekkha, brahmavihara, because there's only so much one can do in terms of the conflicts of the world. And sometimes there are definitely things we can do. We can say, we can advise, we can encourage people to do the right thing. And then other times we just have to wait and step back or step aside. So I'm talking very generally here. There's not always one answer fits all. Sometimes all you can do is meditate and wait. Other times you need to engage, to talk and encourage others to talk and to listen, try and understand the other side. And the more you learn how to not attach so strongly, so blindly to your own views and opinions, that will help in the communication with others and encouraging others to do that. What causes people to break apart is attachment to their own view with their sense of self, strong attachment or blindly attaching, I'm right, you're wrong. That leads on to not listening to each other, not empathizing, not understanding. So developing a skillful way of dealing with your own views and opinions can be very helpful for reducing conflicts. And learning how to use your mouth. So sometimes we have to learn how to stay quiet. The more you speak in some situations, the worse it gets. When you're quiet, you can listen. Other times you may have to say something. Learn how to speak in a way that will reduce conflict, reduce people's stress and suffering in a situation. We have to respond to situations in different ways, but the Buddhist path definitely gives you a lot of skills how to do that. Living with some of my teachers, Ajahn Chah is well known for his communication ability. One of his skills is, they said, he could make a big problem into a little problem just through giving people good advice, getting them to people to look at things in a different way than they were normally, or to make a little problem into no problem at all. That's ideal. When you can reduce all problems into nothing, then conflict disappears. But you can't always do that. Even the Buddha, he was good at communicating to people, listening to them, people had respect for him, but when, say, there was division, say, between, the Sakyan people, his people, and other neighboring kingdoms, the Buddha would encourage them to not fight, not to go to war, not to become violent, and sometimes he could persuade them not to. The armies were drawn up. He said, don't waste your time and energy fighting, because, like when they were fighting over the water rights of a river, something that still goes on today, maybe not so much with war, but in other forms of conflict. The Buddha said, well, what's worth more, the blood in your veins or the water you're going to fight over? Getting both sides to listen, and then they agreed, our blood is worth more to us than the water. So why shed blood over something that is worth less? And everyone agreed to stand down, not fight. But even the Buddha couldn't do that every time. So there were times when the armies were drawn up, he couldn't do anything. He just had to sit by and meditate as they had their fight. Because he'd given them the teachings and done what he could, and he still couldn't resolve the conflict. So unfortunately, sometimes that's all you can do, is just sit by. I remember one time, the very first time I went back to the UK from Thailand, after being in Thailand 12 years as a monk, I went to visit home, and my thinking was, well, I'm going to a non-Buddhist country, my family are not Buddhists, I better take some protection. So I took Lumpur Anand with me, and 3 other monks, so as 5 of us went. I thought, oh, this is good. Well protected, go as a Sangha into the UK And it did work very well, because if you're with other well-practiced monks, then you practice well yourself, it helps, you get support, and generally it was a good trip. But I remember one day we were in London, somebody had a house in central London, they offered it to us to stay for a couple of nights, and it was a chance for me to show Ajahn and the group around some of the sites of central London, because they'd never been there before. And one day we got onto the underground train and we're just sitting in our seat, and just before the door slid closed, a man walked in and he looked at us, 5 monks sitting on a seat opposite him, and he became enraged. I guess he didn't like Buddhism or Buddhist monks or whatever it was he thought we stood for, and he started haranguing us, become very agitated, shouting at the top of his voice, cursing us, criticizing us, being rude, insulting. And I was thinking, what shall I do? Because I was the only English monk there, the other 4 were Thais. I was thinking, what shall I do? And I looked at the other monks, and they were all senior to me, and they were all sitting peacefully, restrained, calm, mindful. And we weren't doing anything wrong, so I thought, oh, okay, that's probably the best thing to do in this situation. So we carried on sitting there mindfully as this man shouted and shouted at the top of his voice at us. And there was a man sitting next to me, he was a typical English businessman. He's wearing a bowler hat, he's reading the London Times, he's wearing a pinstripe suit, and he had an umbrella. And he looked at the man who was fiercely verbally abusing us, and then he looked at the monks and he shook his head and he jumped up and ran. I think he thought something was going to happen, and we just carried on mindfully sitting, absorbing it. The next thing that happened was the train driver said over the loudspeaker, the man who's shouting, you've got to stop, otherwise we won't leave the station. But he didn't stop, he carried on shouting. So he said it again over the loudspeaker, and the man didn't stop. So the 3rd time, the train driver got out and walked down the platform to this man and said, look, you've got to stop shouting and abusing people, otherwise the train won't leave and you'll have to leave yourself, leave the train. And the man was immediately quiet and said, me? What have I done? And it was totally denied it. So everyone, all the passengers in the train were rolling their eyes. Oh, he's not admitting to what he's doing. So the train driver went back to his cabin, and the man started shouting at us again. So the next thing that happened was 2 policemen were called, and they came down and they took him off the train. Don't know what happened to him. And then the train went on. But all this time, the 5 Buddhist monks just sat there, quietly, mindfully, absorbing the situation, because we weren't doing anything wrong, and we didn't provoke him, we didn't do anything, we just absorbed it and then went on our way. And I've seen that kind of practice over and over again with the monks of Ajahn Chah. So well trained that in situations where people are getting rude or agitated or upset or critical, to be very mindful, restrained, and sometimes speaking if that's what's required, sometimes just being mindful, restrained and quiet. And it's one of the best ways to de-escalate a situation of conflict, is to not provoke the person. Sometimes it means being silent, sometimes it means speaking, but speaking gently, carefully. But your aim is to de-escalate. All our practice is about reducing kilesa, whether it's our own kilesa or the kilesa of others. So sometimes it means you do or say what will help to reduce the greed, anger, delusion in someone else's mind. Sometimes you're doing it for yourself. More often than not, you're doing it for both in that situation. And that's a reflection, in a conflict is, what can I do that will reduce the amount of greed, anger and delusion at this time for myself, for others? And then you act appropriately based on that reflection. So definitely the Buddhist teachings can help with conflicts, but how much just depends, I guess, on the situation and you can't expect to solve every conflict. Sometimes it just has to play itself out and you have to sit back. Just depends. So I think that's it for tonight. So thank you for listening. There's another Q&A session. There'll be another one next week. So in the meantime, encourage you all to keep practicing every day. I think you'll find this is where you can really find some peace and happiness in your life. And we'll wish you a safe week, COVID-free week. So we wish you good health and safety, a peaceful mind, and may the blessings of the Triple Gem guide you and protect you.
Handamayang Dhamma Kataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anu